On this episode of Modern Greaser, we're looking at a year in review of what it's like to drive a diesel swap. And I have owned this for over a year, and I'm going to tell you a little insight of what it's like owning a diesel. I've never owned a diesel as a vehicle before, so this is a first time for me to learn the ropes. So what is it like? Is it that hard? So the first thing I wanted to show you is how my truck is sitting on this awkward angle of a hill of a driveway that I have. The first day that I bought this truck and I brought it home, it drove just fine, and I took it to work the next day and it died on my street instantly. And my first thought was, this hill that I live on is this angle, is a round fuel tank, and if that gets low, you might suck some air in. Turned out that was not the case. So being that I live on a hill, I was worried about, this is my fuel tank right here. So the fuel tank being round, you worry about air getting sucked into it. But diesels in regular production vehicles have baffles inside, so the sloshing of fuel will hopefully prevent that, where you don't have to worry about fuel levels. But that's something you need to think about if you're making a diesel swap, or if you own one, that can be an issue. So make sure you have a proper baffled tank, or keep the level high enough that you're not going to suck air in. Diagnosing my no-start issue came down to a more simplistic process than diagnosing the infamous gasoline counterpart. Diesels don't have spark plugs. Hurrah! That rules out a no-spark situation. Diesels have one main issue: fuel. What was my fuel pressure? Was I getting fuel? You have two main fuel entry points. First, fuel enters the lift pump, which is then sent to the injection pump. Being that this 12-valve Cummins is bare bones with no sensors, no emission issues, I had to find out what fault existed in my very simplistic fuel delivery system. So my issue with this truck dying on the street and dying under load wasn't an issue with air getting sucked into the fuel. It was a problem with the lift pump. I ended up taking the lift pump off and replacing it with a Shine Home lift pump, which cost me $38 from Amazon. After sifting through the reviews of this lift pump versus the USA built counterpart, this one actually fared better. 1 year later, so far, so good. So the one reason you can't have air in the system is that you are compressing the actual air and adding fuel to that mixture. So if you have too much air and not the right fuel air mixture, it's not going to combust under that compression with the direct injection that diesels are. So on this 12-valve Cummins, the lift pump has an actual plunger where you can initiate priming the system, so you may not have to crack a bleeder, and I've read people running out of fuel and just being able to simply do that. On most diesel engines, you have to bleed the system, so you have to consider that if you're running a diesel. Okay, I admit this Spectre air filter is a piece of garbage, and I've been needing to replace it. However, I did not learn until talking to one of my friends who's a diesel mechanic that air cleaners are such an integral piece to diesel engines. So a diesel engine has very tight clearances where the diesel fuel has to compress. So if you get dust inside the engine, those dust particles will actually smooth out the cylinders, and you're gonna have issues with your engine. So one of the #1 things is to keep a good clean filter on it. And he said, don't go buy a K&N filter for this, because a K&N is gonna let too much particles pass it. Get a regular old plain paper filter. And so I am going to upgrade this and make sure I keep it nice and clean. So you see people running those turbo guards on their turbos. You definitely don't want to do that in a diesel engine. One thing that I tackled on this was the killer dowel pin, the KDP. That is the metal pin that vibrates loose, comes down into the timing gear setup, and kind of destroys your whole front end of your engine. So that's the first thing I checked, because I did not know the history. The current owner that I bought it from didn't know the history of it. So I went in there and they actually threw some RTV over the killer dowel pin. It would start to wiggle and push through the RTV. So that's, I don't think, a tried and true way of fixing it. I put a tab on it, and you can make your own tab, or you can go and buy one for like $6 on Amazon, which was the easy route for me. Boom, threw it on there, and kind of that was that. So that's one thing you definitely want to check out if you own one of these particular diesel engines, but that was something else that I had to do upon purchasing it. We're going to talk about having the proper coolant in your diesel. You can't just go putting water in your diesel engine. This 12-valve Cummins is a cast iron block, so putting water in it can be detrimental, obviously, because it rusts. They have different types of coolant out there, and you can't use regular automotive coolant in your diesel engine. So one thing you have to worry about diesel is cavitation. Cavitation is, motherfucker, I don't even know. Cavitation. Proper diesel coolants have SCAs, that's supplemental coolant additives, and those different additives protect the different types of diesel engines. So some diesel engines have cylinder linings and things like that, and basically what it is that the cylinder doesn't go straight down and up in a diesel engine. It kind of goes down in a vibrating manner that causes micro implosions that basically, in a long story short, since I'm going to mess up the whole scientific meaning behind it, is that it can cause breaches in the cylinders and your coolant, and you'll have water in your oil or oil in your water, coolant. One other important thing you need to know when operating and owning a diesel engine is having proper fuel filtration. One common issue on these 12 valve Cummins and even the 24 valve Cummins is that the fuel filter head leaks at these nuts here in different areas on it, and this one here was kind of sealed up from, you know, basically modifying this engine and fitting it in here. So this is kind of a paper basket, paper filter that sits down in this basket, and this head goes on it. Well, they leak. And so Gino's Garage out of Cummins, Georgia, I got an actual CNC milled filter head that will replace this whole setup, so I don't have to worry about any of the leaking issues down here or up here. Because then, and I had some oil leaking. It turned out the valve cover gaskets on this, I threw another set of valve cover gaskets on it. Boom, she was good to go. Now there's a tappet cover, you got to keep your eye on that. There's a couple different things that you can do with that. That's another area where they're kind of prone to leaking, but that seems to be doing all right. I kind of went down there and torqued it a little bit, but not too much to where you're going to over tighten it and cause leaks. But it really wasn't a big issue. Putting those valve covers on really changed it and sealed it up real well, and it's quick and easy fix on it. So this truck also has an Allison AT542 transmission in it. Now that is a transmission out of a truck that would have an air brake setup, so there's not an actual park on it. So this particular transmission requires special transmission fluid. Go figure. And this is like $60 a gallon, and this thing was 2 gallons low when I bought it, believe it or not. So make sure you're putting in the right transmission fluid. If that's your case, you may not have that same type of situation that I do, but if you're running some type of a diesel application, make sure you're putting the right oil in it. This takes 3 gallons, over 3 gallons of oil, so make sure you're running the right oil, you're changing your oil, you're running the right transmission fluid depending on your application. The other thing with this being a modified vehicle, the person I bought it from kind of had to modify a hose like this because of the different size radiator, and I got rid of this and made it with a singular hose. I just took this hose off, went into O'Reilly's and took my time and found a hose that I could modify, so I only have 2 leaking points instead of 4, and this just is hillbilly. So there's a couple little things that you just kind of go through the process, and you know, it wasn't broke, so I didn't want to fix it, but as I went in and put the proper coolant in, I wanted to get rid of things like this that will eventually be a problem in the future. So there are a lot of different things that you have to think of, lots of modifications on this that I left off. I only kind of wanted to review diesel specific related issues on this episode. I literally had over 40 minutes on this episode that I pieced together of all the different things with driving a diesel swap with all the little headaches and things like that, but they weren't really diesel specific. That was kind of the modification issues, and I can come up with a future episode and put it out there for you guys on some of the modification specific issues that I ran into with this specific vehicle, but mainly I wanted to cover the diesel specific things. So a year in recap on owning a diesel is that you want to have proper air filtration going into this. So you need nice clean air to keep it from wear and tear on all the valuable parts, such as the turbochargers and the valve train and the piston rings and things like that. The second thing that you need to think about on this is keeping the fuel system clean, because you don't want any water, any type of different things getting into the fuel system. So your fuel system needs to be nice and clean. Keeping air out, making sure you don't run out of fuel so you're not out bleeding the lines or trying to worry about that. Another thing that you need to think about with owning a diesel is having the proper coolant in it. So if you get one, make sure you check it out. Make sure that your coolant is proper on it. On this 12 valve Cummins, the other thing is to keep an eye out on the KDP, the killer dowel pin. And last but not least, making sure while working on a diesel that even though your battery is disconnected, that you ever go to turn the engine over by hand, taking off a harmonic balancer or a pulley or something like that, that you don't crank the engine over, because due to the compression, you can actually start the engine by cranking it over like an old Model T. So it's very important that you make sure that while working on it, you don't go cranking it over and end up breaking your arm with the wrench. So that's something else to think about on these engines. Thank you for joining us on yet another edition of Modern Greaser. Be sure to check the description of this video for all the parts and pieces that were mentioned. Now that the video is over, are you ready to be a hero Everybody loves heroes. Who doesn't love heroes? Everybody likes Superman, everybody likes Spider-Man. Are you ready to be a hero? Well, click that subscribe button and you will be my personal hero. Yes, you will be my Superman, my Spider-Man, my Batman. Just click that subscribe button and be someone's hero today.